intellectually.
Leaders for the Enlightenment tend to skip this part of the story. They also pass over the fact that the father of communism, Karl Marx, saw himself as promoting universal reason as well. His new science of economics ended up killing tens of millions of people in the 20th century. So did the supposedly scientific race theories of the Nazis.
So dishonest. It is so dishonest. Onkar?
Yeah, I mean, so this part is true, not of what he's saying, but it's when you get enormous value created, there's many people who want to take it over, not match the achievement, but take over and in the end destroy the achievement. So it's true, I think, that after the scientific revolution and into the Enlightenment, when the power of science has been to any honest person, been shown beyond any shadow of a doubt as this is the path to knowledge, then the people who are on the side of faith, emotion, and irrationality will couch their views as this is a rational view. I'm using science, and it's true of the race things for the Nazis. It's true of Marx. This is scientific socialism. Now it's not. If you actually look into it, I mean, the idea that the economics is scientific. There were way better economic theories from Smith and the Austrians and Mill and Ricardo than what Marx is producing at the time. So even in the context, this is not, if you're trying to follow reason, this is not the theory that you would embrace. But it is true that the villains couch their positions now in the terms of science. And so you can't just take, oh, well, someone says he's pro-science, so he must be pro-science. You can't do that. But that doesn't mean what he's saying is right in this video.
And on the race issue, one of the major critiques of the Enlightenment from the left is that it was racist, right? It was associated with the colonialism, with the exploration of the New World, with the institution of slavery in America and in the Americas, and etc. And that's something, the relationship of the Enlightenment to now we have a very empowered Europe, because it has knowledge is power, and it has a lot more knowledge and a lot more power, encountering people who don't have this knowledge and power. And how are they going to understand those people? What are they going to do about them? How are they going to understand their differences from those people? And then how are they going to try to govern them, live with them, enslave them, take them over, educate them, whatever? This is a difficult question that's going on in this period. And anti-racists and people who are in favor of women's rights, there's long been, I mean, for at least 100 years, in the movements that are advocating for these things, a lot of tension between two ways of fighting for the rights of racial minorities and criticizing the abuses of them. And one is a kind of extension of Enlightenment ideals. And this is what really drove the abolition movement in America, or at least a large part of it. It's what you see in someone like Frederick Douglass writing on this, saying, look, there are certain universal ideals that were articulated, for example, in the American Declaration of Independence, which were true, and we haven't been living up to them. And certain allegedly scientific race theories are wrong, or if they're right, they're irrelevant to what people's rights should be. And likewise, you know, women's rights should be respected and so forth. There's that kind of view. We're pro-reason. Reason has, in fact, identified principles like all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, right? And then we have to live up to those. And there's another view that says reason is a white male patriarchal oppressive construct, and down with reason on behalf of women and Black and brown people. And those two views have been kind of warring. And you know, in my view, it's pretty clear that the first one's right and the second wrong. But that's kind of a little bit of the kind of intellectual history of race thinking related to all this.
Good.
The greatest catastrophes of modernity were engineered by individuals who claimed to be exercising reason. In contrast, most of the progress we've made comes from conservative traditions, openly skeptical of human reason. The Enlightenment's critics, including John Selden, David Hume, Adam Smith, and Edmund Burke, emphasized the unreliability of abstract reasoning.
would you consider, I mean, the claim that all progress has come from tradition and skepticism is quite outrageous. But would you consider Adam Smith, David Hume, where do they fall into kind of the history of philosophically here?
If you look up the phrase Scottish Enlightenment,
Yeah,
in any encyclopedia, or if you just look up Enlightenment and go to the subheading Scottish, Hume and Smith are the first two figures mentioned. Now, I think there were respects in which Hume actually is anti-Enlightenment. He's against certain aspects of the grain of the Enlightenment and is, I think, leading to its destruction. But he's not some unambiguous he's at least as Enlightenment a figure as Kant. And Adam Smith, I mean, the whole claim that he started with, that capitalism is a gift of the miraculous Enlightenment. Why did people make that claim? Because the wealth of nations is seen as an Enlightenment product, and it's the primary defense of capitalism. So this list is crazy. And
if you take Smith, so the idea that he's not laying out universal principles about economic, it's the wealth of nations. Any nation, if you want to become wealthy, there's certain principles that you have to respect. They might be instantiated differently in different countries. And this relates to the issue about, is there one political government for everyone? All these kinds of questions, you can have the caricatures, or you're saying it has to be exactly the same thing. So you need this number of senators and this number of congressmen, or even divide, like not have a parliamentary form. It's the principles that are applicable anywhere. And the instantiation of them might be different, but that obviously that Smith is not articulating principles of economics. I mean, he's regarded as the father of economics precisely because that's what he's doing. So the idea of putting him in that he's a skeptic is
unreliability of abstract reasoning, right?
And look at this. I mean, the claims here are just so bizarre. The greatest catastrophes of modernity were engineered by individuals who claim to be exercising reason, whereas the progress came from the conservative traditions openly skeptical of it. So like Robespierre and Hitler, they were just these random guys. They were individuals. They did it all on their own. And yet Edmund Burke was the voice of a tradition. There weren't other people, there are other people who agreed with him, and we just happened to mention him because he's an avatar for this tradition. Obviously, everything that was accomplished on a large scale, there were individuals who were leaders of it. And then when there were mass movements and they were taking over ideas from largely in the culture. So even the individual on the one side and the culture, the traditions on the other, it's a kind of, sophistry here. And then of these people, I mean, here's maybe the time to talk about the French Revolution issue, because Edmund Burke is a kind of obvious critic of it. And the French Revolution was a disaster in how it transpired. And it's true that some of the better Enlightenment figures were too enamored of it. Certainly Jefferson was. And there were some really awful things he said about it. And so if you're going to think of the American Revolution as of the American revolutionaries, Jefferson and Paine are the most clearly associated with the French Enlightenment, right? Paine went over and took part in the French Revolution. And Jefferson was seen as pro-French and really was in a lot of ways. And what Burke is recommending is a kind of gradualism. We should be wary of breaking with tradition all at once in a kind of, upend everything kind of way, as was happening in France at the time. A promoter of a kind of gradualism. Now, I'm no expert on Burke and where exactly he would fall and whether you would count him as kind of moderately Enlightenment or anti-Enlightenment, and whether you would really count what he's saying as skeptical of reason. But the ideas that are reasonable within Burke, that are good as criticisms of what's going on in the French Enlightenment, that other people at the time had who were clearly pro-Enlightenment, people like, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, who too much is made of these days, but still was an all right guy, and John Adams and these kinds of people. They would say, yeah, of course you have to learn from history, and of course you have to think about how things can be done at, you shouldn't just overthrow things willy-nilly. And in that, I mean, think about the most radical Enlightenment founder wrote the Declaration of Independence, and here's how it starts. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. Right? And then he says later, right, we don't break by light and transient causes. So it's not like we should willy-nilly overthrow everything in some dictatorial overnight manner. There are people who thought that, and that is the more Rousseauian and then eventually Robespierrean, Jacobean kind of view. But it's not the view of this whole movement. It wasn't the view of the American founders, and it's not being the view of the American founders wasn't because the American founders had some view that was contra this strain of the Enlightenment. This kind of caution and thinking about it is in Locke, it's in too much so in Hobbes, who it's ambiguous whether you'd even count him as Enlightenment, but is as much an influence on this tradition as someone like Rousseau is a part of it. So it's part of what reason does, that you look at the status quo, think about what's good and bad about it, and try not to throw out your babies with your bathwater when you're changing.
And it's in the French Enlightenment. It's in the Encyclopedists. It's in the Diderot. It's in Montesquieu. It's in it's not like the French Enlightenment was this nihilistic leading to the gallows, separate from the rest of the Enlightenment.
And I also think relevant here for thinking about the French Enlightenment, you have to think what comes before. Yeah. And England is a lot better than France, I think, politically and culturally in that sense. So that you would willy-nilly overturn the English system in this way is, okay, that you might think that's really nihilistic, but the French system was bad. And the absolute power of the king, and that you could understand people rebelling, and even so I think the leaders of the French Revolution, it's a very religious mentality, but that people, you could imagine parts of the population just fed up and want something different, and that is, I think, much more understandable in a situation where the political climate isn't nearly as good as it is in England. It's one thing to overturn England. It's another thing, something like despotism in France.
And the other thing to think about, if you're thinking about what's the difference between the English and the French Revolution, and between Lockean and Rousseauian thought, that is totally counter to what Hazani is saying here, is that the American and English revolutions were much more explicitly individualistic than the French Revolution. And the Lockean thought is much more explicitly individualistic than Rousseauian thought, which is about the general will. You don't get general will as part of the rhetoric of the American Revolution, because you don't get it as part of the rhetoric of Locke and the people that they're drawing on. But it is a major part of Rousseau, the kind of swallowing up into the collective whole and the general will. And you get, I think that's an influence on why fraternity is such a big part of the equality and fraternity are such a big part of the cries of the French Revolution, in a way that they weren't. Equality was, but not fraternity, of the American Revolution. And again, that's going with, but no, according to Hazani, the French Revolution is hyper individualistic, as opposed to these conservative traditions that is where everything really good comes from.
I mean, yes, I mean, the French Revolution is also associated with secularism, because the French Enlightenment was far more secular than the Scottish or the English Enlightenment. So they associated more with secularism, even though it's not clear that it was. That is, the people actually engaged in the French Revolution.
I mean, Hume is one of the few pretty clear atheists of this period. So to say the Scottish Enlightenment's not
Voltaire.
No, but Hume in
Scotland. Sense, yes.
I mean, Voltaire is more so, but the Scottish Enlightenment was pretty secular, I think. I mean, it wasn't as militant about it, though. And that's
partially because England was better than France. I mean, Voltaire had to flee for his life, even in the mid 17th century, because of his atheist positions.
But all that atheist means in this context is you've abandoned the traditional supernaturalistic religion that's dominated. So Catholicism, Protestantism. It doesn't mean you've abandoned the religious mindset. And that's a way greater achievement. And I think a lot what you see in the French, some of the French leaders, is it's the religious mindset. And you even get rhetoric about a new religion of reason. There's no such thing as a religion of reason. So they haven't got out of that mindset. And I think in that sense, the English and the more scientifically minded, it's not just they've abandoned something, but they've substituted something better for it. That this is what it looks like to pursue knowledge. And if you don't have that, that's what secularized religion looks like. It's you've abandoned one and you pick up something that is in essentials the same in its dogma.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Down through history, various political and philosophical movements have sprung up, but most of them have died. Some, however, like democracy or communism, take hold and affect the entire world. Here in the United States, perhaps the most challenging and unusual new philosophy has been forged by a novelist, Ayn Rand. Miss Rand's point of view is still comparatively unknown in America, but if it ever did take hold, it would revolutionize our lives. And Ayn, to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize, I know this is difficult, can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute. That man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it. And that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality, which has so far been believed impossible, namely, a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason. A morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
How does objectivism differ from the philosophies that many of us have been exposed to in our youths? Philosophies based upon religions, theologians, dogmatists.
The very first difference, objectivism tells you that it is not right, it is not proper to man to take anything on faith. Religion is a matter of faith. You accept a religion emotionally or because you were born to it. You have not chosen it rationally. What objectivism will tell you is that reason, man's reason is his basic means of survival. That is the most important faculty which he has, and he has to guide his life and make his choices by means of his rational faculty. He has to make his own choices, but he has to know how to make them. It is immoral for him to act on his emotions, to be guided by the whim of the moment. That objectivism holds as very wrong, very immoral. And morality, in fact, consists of following your reason to the best of your ability. So that rationality is the basic virtue from which all the others proceed.
My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him. that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
Tell me the value of selfishness.
Use another word, self-esteem. The value of selfishness is that you esteem yourself as a value, that you live according to your nature, which means by the judgment of your own mind, and you respect your own mind, you respect your own ability to do the right thing, therefore you respect the possibility of being a morally virtuous person, and you regard yourself as a value worth preserving. To make a success of yourself in any line of rational activity is a great virtue, and people will attack you for exercising your ability, for hard work, for consistency, for ambition, and they will want to make you feel guilty of it. Mm-hmm. That is the greatest evil, according to my philosophy.
And wait, say that again. The greatest evil, according to your philosophy, is to attack an individual because of virtue.
What I call it is to experience or act on hatred of the good for being the good. That is attacking people for their virtues, for their achievements, for anything they have which is a value, actually, not for their flaws and not for their evil. In fact, people who preach that are the ones who are mawkish about the evil people, the failures, the liars, the cheats. Everybody who is weak suddenly acquires some kind of value. But anyone who is a success has to be attacked for his success.
And look at how you have been attacked.
Oh, I know.
How you have been criticized. There are many people in this country, forgive me, in this world who think you're daft.
They don't. They want you to listen to that.
Using the super chat, and I noticed yesterday when I appealed for support for the show, many of you stepped forward and actually supported the show for the first time. So I'll do it again. Maybe we'll get some more today. If you like what you're hearing, if you appreciate what I'm doing, then I appreciate your support. Those of you who don't yet support the show, please take this opportunity. Go to yaronbrookshow.com/support or go to subscribestar.com, Yaron Brook Show, and make a kind of a monthly contribution to keep this going. I'm not sure when the next